Dungeon 23, a project where I drew rooms of a megadungeon every day for the year 2023, more or less. Sean McCoy of Mothership fame came up with the challenge, and I was one of many to take it on. I drew the rooms directly on the corresponding days of this calendar planner, so each month would form a floor of a megadungeon. I was really making this up as I went along, so there's a lot of weird stuff in here. I wasn't even really thinking about anyone playing it until a whole bunch of people asked me to publish it. Some wanted a book, some wanted a poster, so I'm doing both. I've just launched a Kickstarter campaign as part of Zine Quest to help get this published. It's called The Blades of Gixa, and you can get it at paradiso.ooo/Gixa or use the QR code. If you're watching this while the Kickstarter's running, it'll take you to the campaign. Otherwise, it'll take you to a pre-order or shop page. Thanks for your support. Okay, this video is me drawing the entire final month of the book, the 12th floor for December. As you might imagine, there are some huge spoilers for the module here. So if you don't want to get spoiled, pause the video, like it, subscribe, and head over to paradiso.ooo/Gixa to learn more in a spoiler-free way and get yourself a copy. Okay, with that preamble out of the way, let's talk about drawing. As you can see, I'm using a planner with a calendar layout to make this. Each spread is a month, and I draw the rooms of the megadungeon directly on their corresponding days. I'm pretty loose about scale and proportions, and different floors use different scales. This floor is actually the smallest, most zoomed-in level. In a way, it's more of a scene than a dungeon floor, but there's still plenty of stuff for players to investigate. The deepest parts of the megadungeon got quite weird. Last month was the body of a dying goddess, and this month is on the back of a god, the sky serpent, Yormukunda, which you arrive at through a wound in the goddess's body. And things at this point in the dungeon get more symbolic and mythic in flavor. Like there's a character who comes up later in the month who's crying continuously, and their tears form these rivulets which spray off the snake god and fall as continual rain on the world below. These spines are features of the god, extra large pointy scales or frills, which can potentially be harvested, a very rare resource. Here we have more streaks of tears, and astral candles, which are actually vents. The snake god's insides are impossibly hot, and fumes burst out of its skin in the form of these flaming smokestacks, forming constellations as it flies through the sky. Here I'm giving them a little three-dimensionality with some shadows. The snake god is accompanied by a cohort of Give, which are kind of like snake angels. As the god flies through the sky in its eternal rotation, its Give fly with it. Here I'm adding a bit of shadow to show how low it's flying over the god's skin. Okay, next week. To the front of the snake god, the snout. Do snakes have snouts? Anyway, this square is just going to be a big old nostril. I take this very simple zigzag approach to drawing scales here, more concentrated at the edge to give a sense of volume and curvature, which I'll extend into the next day here. Okay, so here I'm using correction fluid to clear some of the scales I just drew, because I've decided that since the god's insides are impossibly hot, there should be plumes of caustic smoke flowing out of the nostrils. And a little more shading. Okay, for the next day, we have the burnt black skeleton of a dwarf. He's an important character. He's dead, obviously, but he's important to the history and lore of the megadungeon. He was using the heat of the god's breath to forge weapons of incredible power, but was killed in the process. There's much more to it, of course, but let's keep going. This day is just a huge eyeball. It looks cool, but I actually come back later and redo it, which I think is the only time I've fully redone an area in this dungeon, because the perspective ends up being way off. Plus, it just looks too human for a snake god. I make it much snakier later. You'll see. Here I'm filling in some of the scale detail above the eye, where the scales are really dense to imply the curving edge of the serpent. Continuing the scale detail into the next day. And now those rivers of tears. You can see down in the next week I've loosely sketched some figures. Last month and this month are the only floors where I sketched anything out in advance. In general, I avoided sketching because adding a little bit every day was more important to this project than making something coherent. So I was trying to work in a more in-the-moment, stream of consciousness style. And that's how most of the dungeon is. But towards the end, some of the ideas which had been bouncing around started to coalesce into larger themes and gave me a bit more structure to work with. Following that required some planning, some sketching ahead, to remind myself of things I wanted to include and make sure that everything would line up. I still left a lot of room to make stuff up as I went, though. And here we have another part of the stream of tears. These streams flowing over scales are slippery, and since the god is flying high above the ground, it can be quite dangerous to attempt to ford them. If you lose your footing, you may well fly off the side into thin air. And to add a little extra detail, a spear with a tattered banner embedded in the flesh. I didn't really draw it so you could see a symbol on the banner, but I'll add that in the margins later. And over behind the banner, we have an adventurer's pack, belonging to someone who came here before. There will be several of these on this level, from a party who met a disastrous end. In the next day, we have more flowing tears, creating dangerous, slippery ground, with an enticing and quite powerful magical ring stuck in the scaly riverbed. One of many legendary treasures on this final level. Next week, back to the front of the serpent god, defining the shape with more scales. Here we're going to have another adventurer's pack, this one belonging to the burnt dwarf up above in 12.5. And of course, he's got a pair of axes on there. Feels very dwarfy to me. Some shadow for the scales and to help ground the pack. And some marks here and there for more scale texture. This dwarf was, in true dwarf manner, a master blacksmith and metallurgist, and had a bunch of exquisite smithing tools he brought here in his pack, now scattered about on the ground. He even has an anvil in there. I think he must have some kind of bag of holding for all this heavy stuff. And another adventurer's pack, dropped in a hurry, stuff spilling out, a bit of shadow, but then I realized that actually this pack should be sitting in a pool of blood. This text is cramped. Some more details while that dries, and rewrite it. That's better. This panel and the next are two of the most important in the entire mega dungeon. I'm not going to get into what's going on exactly and what it all means here. You're going to need to get the book or posters for that, which you can do right now at paradiso.oo/Gixa or use the QR code. Anyway, we've got an important character with a blade in her gut, and she's clutching another buried in the back of the sky serpent. This is very zoomed in relative to the rest of the dungeon, but it's still hard to get very detailed at this scale. And here we have a hand reaching out to hold hers, and 7 small flames arranged around her. And here's where that trail of blood leads. She's lying in a pool of it, which connects to the tears up above, which I'll start filling in here, carefully around the body so as not to obscure it. And gradually the blood mixes with the water of the tears, trying to make a nice smooth transition here. Oh, and it'll flow around this flame. The next day, another important character, shrouded in a robe, kneeling, holding the hand of the dying elf. Hair hanging down from their face, wet with the tears that flow down in an impossible stream. A 7-pointed star on their back. A frayed hem, bare feet, and the tears, flowing out from them and over the scaly back of the sky serpent in all directions. I like this way of drawing flowing water. It's fairly quick and straightforward. And I think it does a decent job of implying motion and currents. Okay, this is the part I really had sketched out, so once the ink's dry, I hit it with an eraser. Moving on, we're going to have more of those spines over here. A dangerous but harvestable resource, made more dangerous by the water streaming past them. rendering the scaly ground slick and slippery. And here we have more of that flowing water. In addition to flow direction, this technique can also sort of hint at foam and caustics. And then adding in some shadows for depth, so it feels like these spines are really sticking up out of the water. Okay, over here, half submerged in the water, another adventurer's pack. This one's open, half empty and soaked through, with a nice little bedroll, and some shadow to ground it, and a stubby little short sword. On to another week, and another part of the front of the Sky Serpent. Again, using this simple zigzag scale pattern, denser along the edge for depth. And here we have another of the serpent angels flying alongside. This one is in archgeave. You can tell because it has 4 wings. It's flying very low to the surface of the god serpent, as you can see from its shadow. Drawing the shadow in this way with lines helps imply movement as well. Okay, over here I'm starting with a stack of arcane books and a leather band holding them together, WinRAR style. Except I don't love how that looks, so I get rid of it and start on the adventurer's pack that'll be right behind it. Now that the correction fluid's dry, I finish drawing the books, and then start adding the strap. And finish it off. And now to ground it all with more shadow, and add in some more scaly bits. Now this will be a freaky thing for players to find. A complete human skin with a tear down the back, as if the person it once contained molted and emerged transformed. More scaly texture, and some blood feels appropriate here. I wouldn't expect this to be a particularly clean process. Another character over here in the midst of a powerful magic ritual. A kobold monk sitting in meditative stasis, passing prayer beads continually through his fingers, with a nice little tail, and a circle of magical energy around him. A bit more scale texture, and grounding him with shadow. Over here, I'm adding the edge of this rivulet as it flows into the next day. And here, a rather unassuming staff belonging to our kobold monk. And more scale texture. And here, emerging from the flow, another constellation of so-called astral candles, which run all along the god's back, venting its fiery insides and forming the stars in the night sky. And I have a fun time flowing the water around them. Drawing textures like this can be kind of soothing. Another special item belonging to an adventurer who came before, a small round rug flopping over from the wind, with this fun little fringe, and shading carefully so as not to lose that detail. And without it getting too busy, I want to imply a pattern on the top, and the stream ever flows. Last week of the last month, the other great nostril of the Sky Serpent, a plume of white-hot caustic smoke flowing out, and rows of zigzag scales to keep that texture and depth going around the side of the god. And a bit more definition to the smoke as we move into the next day. I'm also trying to imply some degree of transparency, with little hints of the scale pattern peeking through the smoke. And then cleaning up some pencil marks here and there. And here we'll have the description of the smoke plumes. It's been a fun exercise trying to figure out how to position text and descriptions integrated with the imagery on the page. It feels a little bit like laying out a comic book, but a weird, non-linear one. For the next day, we have a brow ridge, and this is my new approach to a snakier eye for our serpent god. Much more round, with a big slit pupil, and more zigzag scales down here for depth and texture, and shading around the eye. Each eye has its own name. Now, the original eye obviously doesn't match this one, so I'm going to lay down a whole lot of correction fluid to cover it up. I did the vast majority of this dungeon directly in ink with no sketching, because I wanted to just make decisions and live with them, but in this case it really affects the overall appearance of the level. Plus, there's a little something extra I want to add. Okay, while that dries, on to the next day. Rows of zigzags again for the scales along the edge. And over here, the last adventurer's pack from the party that came before, with a bedroll, pockets, odds and ends, a shadow grounding it. This pack belongs to our kobold monk. Continuing the zigzag scales, starting to curve upwards, and here we have a ring of entrails and another pool of blood, a blood magic portal. I wasn't really expecting that this mega dungeon would be this gory and gross, but I guess this is what's in my head, so. The way I draw blood for this dungeon is similar to how I draw water, but with much denser lines for a darker look. Also, these gaps give a sense of sheen, reflected light, and ripples or waves. Penultimate day. Scales really curving up now, to match the arc in the first days of the month. And the tears flow down on this side as well, dripping off the edge and forming rain. And over here, where the portal blood and tears meet, a weird, rusty blood moss grows, gradually spreading across the skin of the sky serpent. Or portal moss, I guess I called it. It feeds on the magic-infused blood and tears. Last day of the whole mega dungeon, December 31st. At this point, we already have all the major elements in place for this level, so this is just wrapping it all up with more flowing tears, and scales, and moss, and the spray of tears becoming rain falling on the world below, and a little fungus grove sprouting out of the moss. Okay, now that the correction fluid on 12.6 is dry, time to redo the eye. There's a slash here in the eye and a little spray of blood. There's a story behind all this too. It gets pretty weird, if you couldn't tell. Now, since this is an unusual floor that kinda sums up to a big image, I'm going back over everything to add some more texture and shading, so the whole thing will be more coherent visually. And here we go, the last floor, on the back of the great sky serpent, god of the cosmos, flying high above the world. And let's flip back through all the spreads. All of the floors are done, the layouts at least, and much of the contents. But I will be filling out the margins of all of these spreads, with tables, stats, lore, and other information to help run the dungeon, should you decide to take that on. There will also be a few additional spreads with more in-depth stuff about the world of the mega dungeon, factions, and so on. All of which will be featured in the book and on the pair of 2x3 foot screen-printed posters. All of which you can get at paradiso.000/Gixa or by using the QR code. The Kickstarter is running as of this video's release, so that'll take you to the campaign page. If you're watching this some months or more from now, that link will take you to a pre-order page or the shop. Finally, huge thanks to all of my supporters, members of this channel, and my website, paradiso.zone, where you can subscribe to support my work and get lots of cool stuff. It's my supporters who actually make it possible for me to pursue these projects. So thanks so much to all of you. See you over on the Kickstarter. Bye.